appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about an issue that really, I have to say, the last couple of decades, I pretty much devoted a lot of my professional life to, which is promoting and preserving the right to operate as independent contractors. In fact, while Tony gave my law firm connection, I also have a separate connection, which really I think is what caught Pam's attention, which is I'm also the executive director of a group called the Coalition to Promote Independent Entrepreneurs. And what that is, it's more of an advocacy group that's dedicated to essentially trying to inform policymakers on the importance of preserving independent contractor status to our economy. I know if you've read in the press, there have been a lot of articles about the economy's been tough, and that leads to more independent contractors. Well, you'd think that would be the case, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes data every month on the numbers of independent contractors that are operating in the country. I can tell you, we started tracking this in June 2009, when a lot of the changes were starting to come about. And actually, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the numbers of independent contractors have been on the decline. And it's my view that the reason for that is that the federal and state governments have significantly increased the regulatory risk to companies that do business with independent contractors. So naturally, they're rational actors. So there has been some companies that have just made the decision that the risks are too high. So the people who are independent contractors seeking clients, those client opportunities are beginning to diminish because, at least in my view, I think this regulatory risk is certainly a significant factor. And how it ties into this industry, the mystery shopping industry, I guess you'd always wonder, well, why is it that it just so happens that probably over 90%, if not probably higher, 95% or higher of the industry operates on an independent contractor-based business model? Why is that? How could that be? Well, in my view, it's like a lot of other industries that operate on a similar type of business model. It ties into the fundamental distinction between employees or independent contractors. Fundamentally, a person, if for example, a company doesn't just choose to treat someone as an employer or independent contractor, or at least it should not. But really what happens, it really depends upon the nature of the relationship. And the fundamental difference is a concept of control. Okay, if the company controls the means or methods of performance, and the company dictates how, when, where, and how the work is performed, well, that person is an employee. Okay, by contrast, if a company doesn't, the company effectively defines the objective, and that's pretty much it, then that's an independent contractor relationship. And in this industry, the way it operates, the companies that arrange for the mystery shopping events, they really have virtually no control over the means or methods of performance. Because effectively, they define the objectives, and they really rely upon the professionalism and integrity of the mystery shopper to do a professional job. And essentially, there are other industries that operate like this as well. And mystery shopping is not alone. The mystery shop certainly is one of them. And also, you think about the companies you do business with, many of them, they make arrangements for hundreds or thousands of mystery shops on a given day. So if you think about it, even if they wanted to try to control what happens, it's virtually impossible. There's no way they could do that. Secondly, a lot of the shops are done incognito. So nobody knows when they're happening or who's doing them at the time. So again, there's a complete disconnect between any type of right of control versus the performance. And also, I think that, again, just looking from outside, it just seems to me that if a company tried to impose too much control over the shop, it might even sort of degrade the quality of the outcome. Because a lot of the mystery shops, they evaluate a customer experience. And I think the whole goal is that the mystery shopper, at least during the evaluation, evaluates that experience as though he or she were actually the bona fide customer. So I think a company doesn't want to try to be overly prescriptive in how the shoppers perform to have the most reliable data. And in terms of quality control, I think in this industry it's predominantly front-loaded, and also again you evaluate the objective. Again, the objective you can define, that's fine. And during the registration process, I think companies try to sort of, through a series of questions, try to attract people who have the talents. Because in this industry, I think it's almost a self-selecting type group. I think because it really does require unique talents that a lot of people don't have. Because you have to be, for example, you have to be a very talented writer. Because you can't write, you will never survive as a mystery shopper. You have to have a very keen power of observation. If you don't have it, you will never survive. I know during the prior session, there are people here who have been mystery shopping 2 to 5 years. Well, if you couldn't write, you wouldn't be here today. If you didn't have a keen power of observation, you wouldn't be here. And to have also, I think, a pretty powerful memory, because you can't sit there, take notes while you're evaluating things, especially for the incognito shops, you can't do that. And you have to be organized, and you have to be detail-oriented, you have to have all these skills, and the fact of the matter is that these are not things that are easily teachable, so essentially people either have these qualities or they don't, and if they do, then they're naturally attracted to this type of work, because this type of work really relies on those types of qualities. So I think the business model is predicated on companies finding people who have these qualities and then relying upon them to do an effective job. And then they don't really know what happens until the shop is done. Then they can take a look at the deliverable. And in my view, that is a classic independent contractor type business model. So then you think about, well, what's the problem then? Well, what's happened, it's really not a mystery shopping industry issue, it's more of a macro issue that's affecting all industries. All industries that do business with independent contractors are currently somewhat under attack. Right now we're in a very unusual political environment, in the sense that during the last several years, there's been an unprecedented number of new state laws, state, federal enforcement programs, federal proposals in the legislature and the U.S. Congress, all targeting companies that do business with independent contractors. Some states recently have enacted significant penalties that are imposed on a company if determined to have misclassified a worker as an independent contractor. For example, California, Maryland have very substantial penalties they've enacted for what they call willful misclassification. And just this week, the state of Louisiana is working on a new bill that poses not quite as significant as Maryland and California, but also significant penalties on companies that are found to have misclassified workers as independent contractors. The U.S. Department of Labor has entered into joint agreements, enforcement agreements, with approximately 30 states now, where they are sharing information and essentially cooperating their efforts in enforcing the laws relating to worker misclassification. And also in the Congress, as I mentioned, there are several bills that would modify the treatment of workers as independent contractors. Some would repeal this very important federal safe harbor known as Section 530 of the Revenue Act of 1978. And what this does, it provides companies that do business with independent contractors with prospective certainty that a company meets certain criteria, and it has prospective certainty that the IRS will recognize these relationships as independent contractor relationships. And it also prohibits the IRS from issuing any type of guidance that would apply the test to different types of industries. So that's been under attack. So all I can tell you is, at the federal level, at the state level, there has been a significantly increased regulatory risk attached to companies that do business with independent contractors. So then, you wonder, well, why should you care as an independent contractor mystery shopper? Well, in my view, the reason you should care is that the current business model offers a lot of advantages that I think you currently benefit from. For example, under the current business model, you can contract with multiple companies, and part of the reason you can do that, currently you can register probably with 5 or 10 companies if you chose to do so. The reason you can do that is because under the independent contractor business model, it's a very low transaction cost associated with registering a new independent contractor. Now, it's not negligible, but it's smaller relative to what that transaction cost is for hiring an employee. And what it does, though, enables you to register with a lot of different companies, and what you can do then, it provides you with a great deal of access to different types of events and opportunities. As was mentioned in the prior session, how do you get the good events that you want? Well, if you can register with these companies, at least you have access to them. And you can choose, essentially, when you choose to work. You can choose which companies you choose to work for. You can choose the days you choose to work. If you decide to take off, say, 3 or 4 months as an independent contractor, you can do that. You don't need anybody's permission to take time off. You work when you want to work, and you have that type of control. As an employee, it's a very different world. In some cases, companies have what's called a non-compete provision, where they can say, look, if you're going to work with us, we don't want you working with any competitor, so we want you to sign this non-competition provision, so you work with us exclusively. Also, some might require some type of minimum hour commitment. They may not permit people to take time off when they choose to take time off. And it's just a very different type of work relationship as an employee. And also, it just seems to me, again, from the outside looking in, because all I know is just what I've observed, it just seems to me that this industry is also, as an independent contractor, I think you reap a much larger portion of the client payment for the shop. Because as you know, okay, the client will pay a certain amount for a mystery shopping event to be performed. Now, whatever that number is, it's 100% of whatever that payment is. See, as an independent contractor, typically, in most industries, the percent of that payment that you end up getting is much higher as an independent contractor than it would be if you were an employee. Because I can tell you that's generally how it works. And the reason for that is it's just simple math. If you're an independent contractor, then the company that makes the arrangements takes, essentially, it has a transaction cost it charges to make the arrangement, but then there's a lot more left over. As an employee, the part that the company ends up having to withhold ends up being a larger percentage. And the reason is that if you're an employee, for example, you might have to hire managers, it might have to be an extra level of overhead because you're managing employees. Also, you need to comply with the employment laws of the states in which the company does business. Excuse me. And I can tell you that, especially in some states, is not a significant cost, and especially with an industry like this, it can be even much more so than others, because mystery shopping is a multi-state business. So you could have a company based in California here that arranges mystery shops all over the country. So as independent contractors, it really doesn't have to worry about, say, what are the employment laws in Illinois? What are the employment laws in Hawaii? Et cetera. By contrast, if that company has to hire employees, then it needs to comply with the employment laws of all those different states in which the shoppers perform the events. I think the answer, it really depends upon how a company decides to adapt. For example, if it were to become an employee-based arrangement, I think it's highly likely you would see companies restricting their geographic territories because, again, you have to ensure compliance in all these different states, and it's expensive. So again, I think, in my view, as you know, as part of our coalition, we believe that the independent contractor option is win-win. We think it provides those who choose to work as independent contractors an opportunity to do so, and if we're companies that are just contracting with a person to perform some type of service over which the company is not going to try to control how it's done, it's good for them as well. An EIN essentially sends the message to the Internal Revenue Service that by virtue of my having an EIN, I have made the decision to be an independent contractor. It's very analogous to having a business card. You ask, why would I have a business card? Well, I can say this with respect to many of the states, for example. If a state is challenging the independent contractor status of an individual, one fact that can be very compelling is if the individual has a business card. And the reason is because states, they view the fact that you have a business card as very compelling evidence that you have made the decision that, yes, I'm operating as an independent contractor. Because why else would you have a business card? Most employees don't have a business card when they go to work. That identifies themselves as their own business. EIN is very analogous to that. An EIN tells IRS, I have made the decision to operate as an independent business. Because generically, the Internal Revenue Service has a taxpayer identification number. A taxpayer identification number in the U.S. typically can be one of two things. You can have a Social Security number, or you can have an EIN, Employer Identification Number. Those are the two options of the taxpayer identification number. An EIN is used solely for a business, a person who's an independent contractor, or if you have a corporation, or if you have a partnership, an LLC, they all have an EIN because that's a business tax ID number. A Social Security number, that you can use individually, or you can also use that as an independent contractor, but it's essentially ambiguous. So you have a Social Security number, you're really not telling the IRS you've done anything because it works essentially in either capacity. So the EIN is helpful because it's an affirmative decision that, for example, if a company provides you with a Form W-9, the Form W-9 is the IRS form to be used to ask a person to provide their taxpayer identification number. And so if you use a W-9, then that's the IRS approved form, and then that can give the company some degree of protection. Just one second. But some degree of protection against any kind of what they call a mismatch. Because if there's a mismatch in your taxpayer identification number and your name, sometimes a company can be subjected to a penalty. So if they use a W-9, it's the official IRS form, and they can in some cases protect the company against the penalty because they've collected the EIN or the Social Security number in the proper manner. I think in today's environment, all independent contractors are facing some degree of increased risk because of this regulatory pressure. And see, so what happens again, okay, companies that do business with independent contractors, and I can just say this, I'm familiar with a broad range of industries where the companies do business with predominantly independent contractors, okay? So what these companies do, because they want to continue the model, and most of the independent contractors, they want to continue the model, so essentially it comes down to now what are some things we can do to help strengthen our independent contractor relationship. Okay, so in that regard, for example, the EIN, other industries, now companies in these other industries have made the affirmative decision that they'll do business with independent contractors who have an EIN, because again, what that does, that provides an additional element of safety that yes, these people will be recognized as independent contractors. Just as an example, state of Wisconsin, until recently, had a list of, say, 9 or 10 factors you need to satisfy in order to create an independent contractor relationship. Well, one of those factors is, does the worker have an EIN? The worker has an EIN, you meet it. The worker does not have an EIN, you don't. I can tell you in the state of Virginia, the state of Maryland, excuse me, they attach a significant weight to whether or not an individual has an EIN And again, the reason for that is that it's a very reliable statement made by that individual that he or she has made the decision to operate as an independent business, essentially as an independent contractor. So there's no ambiguity. Yes, the sole proprietor, independent contractor, yes, those are synonymous. Yes. I think you accurately described the intention behind some of these laws. But also, you have to be mindful that there's also a political undercurrent behind what's going on as well. I mean, there's, by virtue of being an independent contractor, you have certain freedoms and you're operating a business a certain way that also has a political, philosophical connection to it. So there's, politically, there are some who believe that's a good thing. There are others who politically believe that's not a good thing. There are others who believe, and again, I'm not going to debate it, but just be mindful of it, that there are others just philosophically believe that everybody is better off being an employee. No, just as a political, as a philosophical position. I mean, there is that out there, and I think what happens is the laws you're talking about, many of them are proposed, I think, for benevolent purposes, but in some cases they do go a little beyond what you need to do. They go, sometimes they kind of tilt the playing field to the point where it becomes very difficult to establish an independent contractor. And also, think about it like this, through the enforcement, what's been going on at the U.S. Department of Labor, for example, substantial increases in the enforcement budgets at the U.S. Department of Labor, targeting companies that do business with independent contractors. And for even, see, the thing is, for legitimate companies doing business with legitimate independent contractors, it can be very expensive defending against the challenges. And I can tell you, in the state level, many states have become much more aggressive in challenging the independent contractor status of workers. And part of the rationale for that is it's financial. I was at an event probably about a year ago, a guy who represents the association that monitors the state unemployment tax trust funds. There are associations that represent everyone. He was talking about how, at that time, I think pretty much virtually all of the unemployment trust funds statewide across the country are very near insolvency. So the fact is, states, they need to raise money to fund these unemployment trust funds. So one way to raise funds to replenish the trust funds for the unemployment benefits is to make more companies pay state unemployment taxes with respect to workers. So one way to do that is to make it more difficult for workers to qualify as independent contractors, because as independent contractors, you don't pay the tax. But nonetheless, you're absolutely correct, though, that there always are bad actors out there. And all I can tell you about that is that you can have a contract, you can have a business card, you can have an EIN. None of these things will supersede the day-to-day operations. So in the example that you gave, if the company actually operates like that, that company likely will lose, regardless of having a business card, EIN, a fantastic agreement, because those things are always trumped by what are the actual day-to-day operations. Well, this again comes down to a philosophical view, I think. See, in my opinion, I think people, we have a free market economy in this country. And I think, typically, I think if someone is in a position that they don't like, they always have the right to move on. And I really think that's probably the most efficient way to deal with that. Because, I mean, the thing is, we're all in the same position. I mean, our goal when we go to work is we work to make money. Okay, so if I'm working in an arrangement that I don't like, then I'd say that, but I will say this. I've seen, in preparation for this conference, I did read some of the feedback that's been in the industry about, for example, the EIN. And I think there's a product of what's known as groupthink. Groupthink is when people talk about an issue, they talk about it among themselves, they talk about it over and over, and then all of a sudden they start drifting farther and farther and farther afield. There have been studies on this, how this happens. And I think, all I can tell you is what I've laid out for you today is, I think, the principal rationale for why companies do decide, for example, to do business with independent contractors who have an EIN. Because I can tell you that other industries have done so as well, and from what I've read on some of the commentary, and to be honest with you, I was really taken aback when I read some of this, because there seems to be a feeling out there that there's some sort of covert rationale for that. And all I can tell you sincerely is that if there is, I'm not aware of what that might be. Because I can tell you companies typically, well, I'll say this, with the heightened regulatory risk now associated with the independent contractor status, it's resulted in companies that do business with independent contractors having to make changes that they would never have made but for the current climate. I mean, there's no advantage to them. If the regulatory climate had not changed, they probably would still be doing what they'd always been doing for the last 20 years. And now that things have changed, I mean, people have reacted, but for your personal income tax return, I mean, you can still, I'm sorry, report all this on your Schedule C. So it doesn't really complicate life at all. That is not a problem, because they both flow into your Schedule C. Now, I think, just my personal view, I mean, if I were you, I would gradually just operate under my EIN. Because I'll say this, I really believe that if for an independent contractor, even relative to the IRS, I think you're probably slightly, again, I don't want to overstate this, but I think you're probably slightly better off having an EIN in any event, because when you have your Schedule C, you have an EIN reported on the Schedule C, and you're claiming business-related tax deductions. I think, and again, I don't want to overstate this. I'm going to emphasize that. I don't want to overstate this. It's not going to make or break it. But I think it does at least somewhat signal to the IRS that, yes, I am operating as an independent contractor here. I have an EIN. So when I'm reporting these tax-deductible business expenses, and I'm doing that in connection with a business, which I'm telling you I have by virtue of operating with an EIN. And in that regard, I just wanted to mention just a few additional items. For the purpose of today, I brought with me the instructions to the Form SS4. That's the document that you use to obtain the EIN. And you can do it online, you can do it over the telephone, you can do it by fax. IRS makes it very easy for you to do this. See, also, I think, again, mystery shopping is not the only industry doing this. I can tell you other industries also are going the same direction. And all I can tell you that there are, this is probably one of the minimalist type changes that are being implemented if you look at it in other industries. I mean, other industries are making, other more administratively burdensome type changes. Again, all trying to achieve the same objective. Is all they want to do. They want to just continue doing business the way they always have, and they're just trying to essentially make what they believe to be sort of common sense things that they can do going forward, just to try to kind of bolster the defensibility of the status. And the answer to that, according to the IRS instructions, is no. You can operate all of them under the same EIN, because you're one person, and you can use that EIN for all of your businesses. And as I say, you always, of course, have the option. You can set up an LLC if you choose to do so. You can set up a corporation, if you have other reasons, sometimes there are other tax advantage reasons for doing that. I mean, I think, now for those also you need to have a separate EIN for those, but I think, operating as an independent contractor, as a sole proprietor, I think all you really need to do is get the EIN. I think that would be sufficient to I think, tell the world that yes, I am in business for myself. And I'll say this, I mean, again, seeing the Bureau of Labor Statistics data and just seeing the gradual decline in the numbers, I mean, I just think it's, there are a lot of people out there who, say they work for a large company and they've gotten laid off because of, say, they lost a contract or something that has nothing to do with them. There have been a lot of stories about these people. They've decided never, ever again will I ever, put my financial destiny in the hands of one company. I'd rather be an independent contractor. I can diversify my risk. And to me, it's just sad to see that I think the client opportunities are beginning to diminish in certain industries just because of this regulatory risk. And I think one thing that an independent contractor, I think, should think about doing is, how can I make myself as marketable as possible to clients? And I think things like having a business card, having an EIN, I mean, I think it makes you much more marketable because I think it tells a company that, there's a lower regulatory risk associated with doing business with me because I am telling the world that I am an independent contractor. Well, I think that's an excellent point, and I do believe that now especially, I think all independent contractors should try to get as engaged as time permits with their elected representatives, because I think they need to let the elected representatives know how important it is that they retain the status of independent contractors. And you can tell them that, in fact, it's on our, sure we have it on our website more, but we have the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showing the declining numbers and letting them know, don't support these laws. Now again, the ones that are going after the bad actors, nobody has any problem with those. But the ones that are making it difficult for the good actors to operate, those are the ones that we want to urge the policymakers and elected representatives that don't support those, because it really hurts all of us. I'd say the federal and state level, U.S. senators, U.S. congressmen, your elected state delegates, state senators, because they're all active. But that's an excellent idea, and we can do that. We can do that through PAM. We'll put together what we'll do, it'll be sort of a bullet point list of things to do. Because I think that would be helpful, and I think we can do that on behalf of the coalition, because that's something that we strongly support. Also, I'd encourage you to check out the coalition to promote independent entrepreneurs. You can effectively just, that's something else. The more individual members we have, I think that's the better off, because again, we're trying to communicate the message that it's win-win. And I will say, with respect to the EIN, I want to say finally before we get too far along, we have, as everyone knows, I think, there's one company that has made the decision, among others, has made the decision to operate with mystery shoppers who have an EIN, and that is a trend source.
Yes, so we have a rolling deadline where we've been getting our existing field agents over from Social Security numbers to EINs. Those of you who are with us, I'm sure, are familiar with the process. And then any new agents we bring into our system, we do ask them to obtain EINs. June 21st is our current deadline for moving our existing database completely over.
accepting checks and depositing checks in your account, etc. I mean, I think I would have the EIN and the name, the same name that you're using at the bank. Because, or really, whatever you want to call your business. And if you have, say, a doing business as, you can just have that maybe separate. But I think you want to have the EIN, the name on, for example, the W-9. The W-9 is the form companies use to ask you what is your taxpayer identification number. You ought to have the same name on that W-9 that has your EIN, because when they issue payments, they're going to issue them based upon that name, and that should be the same name on the bank account that you're using to collect the checks.
Which also shows.
And now you can always have, I could have, Russ Hollrah, DBA, whatever I want to put. Now I could do that. But what I want to do though, I want to make sure though that whatever name I have on my W-9 corresponds to the EIN, and that's the name I register with the IRS. That same name is I'm going to put on the W-9. Because what's going to happen is the IRS matches. So here's, I guess, the big picture, okay? When you file to get the EIN, you put a name on that form, and they'll issue an EIN to that name, okay? Now that is the same name you should put on the W-9 when you submit that to a company. That's also the same name you should put on your bank account. And when you talk to if it's not your real name, if it's a DBA name, which it can be, that's fine. Just make sure when you talk to the bank, when you open up the account, you just tell them, this is my DBA name, checks will be coming in under this name, and that'll all be fine. Because IRS will match. IRS will match the W-9. For example, you'll get a 1099 at the end of the year if you earn at least $600, and that 1099 name, again, should match the EIN. Well, okay, a federal ID number is more than generic term. So a federal ID number can be either a social security number or an employer identification number.
And I can actually say, for TrendSource, we've been challenged in 15 states now, 2 of which we've lost in, 1 which includes Wisconsin, who at the time when we lost told us outright that if we collected EINs from our independent contractors and not social security numbers, we would have passed. It's in our IC agreement, if you back on it, that you can subcontract as an independent contractor. However, we do ask that if you do that, you just let us know. But since you are an independent contractor, that is absolutely your right to do so, and it is in the TrendSource IC agreement.
What happens, as I mentioned earlier, see, with this industry, it is permissible, well, let's say for any industry, it is permissible when doing business with an independent contractor to define the objectives, okay? Now also, the way a mystery shopping firm operates, which also is very similar to how a very similar business model operates in other industries as well, what's happening is commonly they are arranging a mystery shop for a third-party client, okay? So what I think is important to keep in mind is most of the items that you just mentioned, these typically are requests being made by a third-party client. It's not a mystery shopping firm, and what the mystery shopping firm really does is communicate to the mystery shopper what are the client's objectives. So that's why, again, a lot of times with respect to the mystery shopper, with the mystery shopping firm, okay, it is not itself exercising any type of writing control because all it's doing is just, it's a conduit. It communicates the client objectives to the mystery shopper. IRS number. So no matter where you live in any of the 50 states, all you need to do is just get the one EIN. It's the same process. Again, it's with the Internal Revenue Service, which is it's a federal number. Because now let's say Not if you are an independent contractor and you yourself can represent your entire business.
As a sole proprietor.
Right. Now, if you hire employees, which you can do, and some do, then you may have a workers' comp obligation to them. But otherwise, the answer generally would be no. That is dictated solely by whatever the city or state requires. Having an EIN has zero effect on whether or not you need to have a license. Again, I don't think having an EIN would make any difference because most zoning laws, they pertain to if you're operating a business out of your home. And the question is, are you operating a business out of your home? Well, either you are or you aren't. The fact that you do so with an EIN or with a social security number makes no difference. I think that's probably couldn't have said it better. That's absolutely it. See, the thing is, I think as an independent contractor, mystery shopper, everybody today has the right to obtain an EIN. And I think, and again, I really believe that having an EIN makes, well, it enhances your marketability. It enhances your marketability to any companies that are, here I'll give you a perfect example. Say you have a company that was audited recently in state X, okay? And say for state unemployment tax, okay? And say they lost. Well, okay, and let me tell you, these are very fact-specific matters. In a different industry, just to provide context, there's a company that does business with independent contractors. It has identical contractors. And in one state, for state unemployment tax purposes, they win probably, let's say 85%, but about 15% they lose. And you say, well, how could that be? Well, that's just how things are, because what happens, you have a hearing for an administrative law judge, and sometimes things happen. So imagine you have a company that just, say, lost money. So then they're evaluating, say, 5 potential mystery shoppers. 3 of them have an EIN, 2 don't. You know, probably they might think, well, you know, maybe we'll certainly have some degree of preference for these 3 who have an EIN.